Hi everyone, welcome back to See the Invisible, living with an invisible or rare disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking some time to listen today. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. To share a little bit about this podcast, what I hope to do is spread some positivity, show support for those who, until recently, I feel, haven't had a voice, those with a rare or invisible illness. I think society is starting to see things, see issues with the way organizations handle those who have an invisible illness, and that there's more awareness of what an invisible illness is, and also that most people do know at least one person, if not more, that has an invisible or rare illness. A lot of times those things do overlap. Also adding chronic to the mix, that, having a invisible illness that's chronic, and especially if it's rare, it can, lead to feelings of not having the support or being alone. So after some experiences that I've had over the past year and a half, I wanted to try to provide at least a voice to show support. Now, before I get started on anything, I usually just like to add that I am in no way a medical, insurance, or legal expert. If you do have any questions in those fields, please make sure that you're reaching out to the appropriate person. What I do a lot of times in the podcast is take information from articles that I've read, because I do try to stay up to date on a lot of different things, and then just express, those ideas, those feelings, and based on my experiences. So, what I go over may not be specific to everybody. I do find a lot of times, even if an article is written about one specific illness, some of the points that they give for advocacy or support really are across the board for any type of illness like that. So I do want to share a couple things from my week. If you listen to the last podcast, which is part 1 in this series about asthma and allergies, I know I did go on a while about a certain social media network that will not allow me to boost ads to reach more people. I really let that bother me, and I'm just going to try to relax and say that I know it's not my error, that for whatever reason, they did that. So I want to thank everybody for bearing with me last week, as I spent, more than a few minutes on that. Second, to go with the topic today, I had an appointment with my allergist this week, and he had run some tests. And my whole life, I've been allergic to eggs. Now I'm in my 40s now, and I remember a few reactions when I was young. My mom and my sister both told me that I was in the hospital for a while because they couldn't figure out what I was allergic to or why I was sick. And I was at that age where you first start eating, softer foods. So my mom had been giving me scrambled eggs. They actually fed them to me in the hospital, and it took quite a bit of time to figure out that that was the reason. Even though through my research I find that interesting, because eggs is one of the most common allergens, but maybe that just wasn't known at that time. But the most recent episode that I remember was about 10 years ago, because it was right after my son was born, and it was the first meal that my husband and I ate outside of the house after having the baby, and he's 10 now. So, even without knowing that there was a mayonnaise-based sauce in there, as soon as I ate it, I had a reaction. So this is actually relatively recent that he said I can eat eggs. But I did tell him that I honestly don't think I can, because I do have that recollection of a few bad reactions, even though many were before, I could really remember. And my mom and dad did a great job of, telling me what I could and could not eat, making sure that I was aware of it, but then also adapting meals so that I could eat them. So when I went to college, I did not know what a souffle was. I didn't know that a lot of people use eggs to bind meatballs or meatloaf. So I was really in the dark there, and I actually ate, it was either a souffle or a quiche because I didn't know what was in it. And you would have thought I would question, but I didn't. And that was not a very good experience. I actually called my mom and was so upset because I was so ill and I didn't know why. And when I told her what I had for dinner, she laughed at me. With my college roommate standing there, I wondered why you ate that. So that is actually that scenario. I'm actually going to go over it a little bit once we get into the body of the podcast. But he also said I can eat strawberries, which is actually a little different than the research I found. In the research, it said that a lot of times if you develop an allergy as an adult, which I did to strawberries, that it's usually then for the remainder of your life. But I enjoyed some strawberries this weekend, and I did make sure my husband was around because, I wanted to, just to be safe. And my allergist even said if I wanted to come try to eat eggs in the office, for the first time he could help me with that. He'd set up an appointment, but I just think I've lived this long without eggs. I can continue. So that was something, that was really positive for the week. So like I said, I'm going to go through a couple different scenarios in the episode regarding allergies. Now, this will probably be at least one more part to review some things with asthma, but I'm thinking it might actually be two different parts because I found some really great information on a allergy awareness website, and actually two of them. So it really gives good guidance and information as far as how to handle different things with allergies, how to stay educated, and making sure that the appropriate people know what they need to know. So with children especially, it's making sure the school is aware of it. Now, with allergies, there is a broad range of reactions, but just looking at some numbers, and these are actually from 2014, 2015, children under 18 years of age who have some type of allergy is about 5.2 million. So that's a pretty high number. And also then, if you look at the percentage, it's actually 7.2%, and that was in a 12-month period. So, again, that's a pretty high number, and I will link the information regarding the sources in the comments or information part of the description. So, with that number, there are bound to be some issues where there are events that happen at school where a child has a reaction. So first and foremost, I think it's important to have a good discussion with your child about what they can and cannot be exposed to. Now, there are varying degrees of reaction, and anaphylaxis is the most severe reaction. It's very dangerous. It can lead to, unfortunately, someone passing away. So looking at numbers from 2014, 2015, which is what this study covered, there were over 12,000 schools that responded to the survey. And in those 12,000 schools, there were almost 2,200 anaphylactic reactions. That is, to me, that's extremely high. That's about 1/6 of the schools that responded. Out of those, about 47%, and I am just using round numbers here, about 47% happened while in the classroom, about 20% in the cafeteria, and about 10% on the playground. But an even more negative part of that is less than half of the schools will let the teachers, who are the first line to a student, use an epinephrine or EpiPen on them. They had to have a nurse do it, but about half the schools did not have a full-time nurse available on staff. So if someone is experiencing an anaphylactic situation where they're having anaphylaxis, someone needs to be there immediately. So if you have a child with allergies, it is important to make sure the teachers know. Last episode, I relayed that we had a student at my school who was severely allergic to bees. So the students had that information, and it was not to point out that she had this allergy. It was so that we could be aware. If we saw bees, we could let the teachers know. So it's important both for the student or your child to know, for the staff to know. And I know it's tough with children, but maybe it was just, my school, nobody seemed to have an issue with it where, someone made fun of the other student who was allergic to bees, at least not that I ever saw. But unfortunately, that does occur. So having knowledge is power. I think that's a good saying, because it enables your child and the teacher and other education staff to help the child navigate what is really an obstacle course every day. And also we have to look at what are they actually coming in contact that's causing them to have a reaction. Now, some of the most severe reactions come from, and I'm reading through one of the articles right now, it's egg, fish, milk, peanut, shellfish, so that would include things like shrimp and lobster and crab, soy, tree nuts, and wheat. So sometimes people do outgrow some of those, and some of that more commonly in young children is milk coming from cows, egg, peanut, tree nuts, soybeans, and wheat. So these things are pretty common around a school, you would think. When someone like a child is at home, the parents can accommodate that. They will make sure that they don't have wheat or soy or whatever the offending item is in their house. So that in some ways is good, but you really need to educate a child on what items may contain these other items. And in some cases, if they're made or if an item is manufactured in a plant that has a possible cross-contamination of these items. I mentioned a few minutes ago that when I went off to college that, I ate something that to most people, they just obviously knew it had egg in it. I did not, because my mom just never made it. Made a quiche or a souffle. So when I went to college, I didn't have really the resources, the knowledge to know what I should and shouldn't eat. After that, I did definitely start asking questions, and that's when I learned, oh, well, meatballs and meatloaf sometimes use egg as a binder. And there are some resources too for college students, which depending on how long going through this takes, that might be next week. But even though that specific episode may be next week, I do think it's important to start as a young child who is not going to have a parent or even, an education staff member with them at all times. So it's really important to address all of that. My son has had allergic reactions to strawberries as well. And, I think I'm going to get him into this allergist that I just saw to run the test. But he is very secure in his knowledge. He will ask questions. He will read labels. And, even if it says it's artificial flavor, he's still just trying to stay safe. and he's 12 years old. So I know he's very aware. The dining staff or cafeteria staff at his schools are very aware. And coming from a more rural area, my mom actually used to work with some of the people in the dining services, as well as another one used to be my landlord. And one of them actually called me one day to verify some information. And they knew me, I knew them. So it was really a good conversation, and I'm glad that they checked, because it could have just been an oversight where neither my son or the cafeteria staff recognized something. So I'm really glad they were on top of things and gave me that call when there was potentially something that could have happened. Now, primarily, I've been reviewing articles and information from an organization called FACT, FAACT, standing for Food Allergy and Anaphylaxis Connection Team. And there are some good points on how to educate your child on, what they should and should not do, how to educate the actual school staff. And this site actually has very specific sections that you can go to, and you can even give them as resources to the staff at your school, because they actually have information formulated just for school staff. So our jobs as parents are, like I said, making sure that your child knows what they can and cannot have. Make sure that if you see something about allergies, or you want to get some more information on your own, read up on articles. If there's something that specifically pertains to your child and their allergy, or information that you think the school should know, be sure to provide that. Be very in touch with your school, whether it goes through the nurse, the teacher, or the cafeteria staff at that specific school. But make sure you're confident in explaining this. Don't, for lack of a better term, kind of wash over it. It's okay. It's, they might have a reaction. No. Make sure you have facts and numbers. Even if it's just that number that I read before about the 12,000 schools that responded, and over 2,000 students, or there were 2,000 anaphylactic situations in one school year. So just having that figure, to me at least, is very powerful. So for schools, something that you need to do for them is empower everyone involved. Don't make anybody, I guess I don't want to say don't make, what I should say is make sure that all of those around your child feels that it's important to react quickly, and that they don't have to think about it. They don't have to sit there and think, okay, am I allowed to do this? What should I do? Will the parents get upset if I do this? No, make sure that everyone at the school who has contact with your child feels that they can take action when needed. Make sure that if there's any medical forms that you need to provide, especially those that pertain to medications, most schools will have you sign a paper saying what medications they may be given. So make sure you get that back in a good, timely manner. If there's some type of care plan that you really need the school to have, make sure that your allergist sends information. Now, this was a good point I would have never thought of. Print something out on bright colored paper. So, if the allergist has, certain steps that need to be taken, or some type of plan, print that out on, a hot pink or neon green piece of paper, and make sure that everybody involved in your child's education has that paper, and having it on a bright color will make it stand out. Make sure you check with schools about what types of plans might be available for your child, like if there's certain steps that they can take to make sure that they don't come in contact with the allergen. Now, the one item that, I did kind of touch base on last week as well, is a suggestion was to provide the school with 2 epinephrine pens, non-expired. EpiPens have become exceedingly expensive. These are life-saving tools, yet most people cannot afford to keep one on file, or one at home, much less 2. And if you're providing the school with 2 pens, then that means you need to have at least one with you or with the child at all times. They can run $700 or more, depending on your insurance. And I have some EpiPens, but they are actually years old. So I don't even know how effective that they would be in regards to stopping a reaction if I were to have one. So last week I did link a change.org petition that was started by someone else about the cost of EpiPens. I will go ahead and link that in there again today, because not only EpiPens, but insulin and so many more life-saving medications are just astronomically priced. Even today I went to have an infusion and it ended up being canceled, and it was because they have to go through a whole reauthorization again because of my dosage being changed. And this has already cost thousands of dollars, so having an increase in dosage kind of scares me because I don't know how much it's going to cost. So just kind of across the board, medication costs are something that affect millions of people. Whether it's even just a number of smaller medications, having to pay for those can add up. Even if it's just $3 or $4 a prescription, if you have to take a number, or if you're married to someone and combined, you have maybe 10 different medications to take, that can add up if you're on a fixed income. So I guess I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but just reviewing one of the suggestions, it almost seems like it's very hard to accomplish that given the state of the prescription cost in at least the United States. Make sure too that you keep detailed notes so that you know who you spoke with. So if you ever get a message that, say your child's teacher is going to be out for a while, and this is who's taking their place, check your notes. If you've never spoken with that person about the importance of allergy knowledge, then make sure you contact them. It's also good to let them know about this actual website as well, because there's a lot of information that can be printed out that they can use during just regular classroom activities. And even though we pray something never happens during school, but make sure that you have, or at least ask the staff to kind of have a practice drill, like who communicates to who, make sure they have that down pat. I would really, if my child had a severe reaction to something, see if they have an action plan and see if they ever practice it, or is it just on paper. Make sure that you ask questions about certain scenarios, because at school your child's just not at one desk all day. Ask, what is your response if something happens on the playground? What happens, as I mentioned, a different teacher, if a substitute teacher comes in, if something happens on the school bus, or if they're a part of after-school activities such as a band or sport, what happens if there's an occurrence during that time? The school nurse, if there is one there full-time, should know how to work the EpiPen, but if not, make sure that you discuss it with the teachers and other education staff to know how to use that. Make sure that you know that they can always reach out to you, just as my son's school did, and not just because I knew the person calling. Have that personal touch with, I think it should be with everyone, so that, each child is seen as an individual and their individual needs are addressed. Now, I mentioned earlier that A lot of schools will not allow a teacher to use an EpiPen, but also about half the schools didn't have a full-time nurse on staff. So that could lead to major, major issues. If you can get the epi to the student or to the child very quickly, that helps increase the chances of surviving. And I don't really want to be that grim or morbid when talking about children, but it's the facts, it's reality, it can happen. So when you're communicating with the school, make sure they understand that the delay of having someone contact the nurse come down and give the epinephrine shot, those moments could be the difference between your child just going to the hospital, being checked out, and possibly then not coming home. So those are the two scenarios. So that really needs to be reinforced to the school. And also advocate not just for your child, but for other children with allergies. Other parents may not know that this resource called FACS is out there. So, advocate for them too. Ask those questions, if it's not just for me, then, or for my child, make sure that you also do this for other parents who've said that their child has allergies. So hopefully that will kind of be the impetus or driving force for a school to make it or take those steps to make sure that they have plans in place. There have actually been laws that have been put in place saying that students have a right to carry inhalers and anaphylaxis medication, because there was a time when a child could not even keep their inhaler at their desk. So just imagine a child who's having difficulty breathing, how scary that must be. And I have a nephew who has severe asthma, and he's been hospitalized many times, and it just scares me. He lives far away, and usually I just see things on Facebook or through messages. But, it's worrying to think if he needed that medication, if he needed that inhaler and he could not get it because a school said that, he wasn't allowed to keep it on him, I would be infuriated. But it's because of advocacy for this that those laws were changed after people seeing or hearing about these instances where a child didn't have access to the medication they needed. So, make sure that you're kind of communicating that to the schools in case they give any pushback, that they are allowed to carry it themselves. Contact the cafeteria or food services department to make sure they know. There's also resources for them as well that they can print off from FACT. More questions to ask in regards to how things are handled. I think probably the biggest thing is snacks. I go to get my infusions done, and when I do, we're allowed to bring snacks. I could be there 3.5, 4 hours. So they say you can bring something to eat, but I'm afraid if I bring anything that's even come in contact with nuts, that's probably the most common one that would happen in that type of setting. Things are made in the same manufacturing plants. So candies that themselves don't have nuts in them may have come in contact through possible cross-contamination. So all of that comes into play with questions about what do you do with snacks? Do students celebrate their birthdays in class? And if so, what's done with food? Are there any advance notifications if there is going to be some type of event that has food that's outside of the norm? Will there be any type of, information provided beforehand, almost like a permission slip before they go to a field trip? This will be information provided beforehand to make sure your child is safe. And also, something that I would have never thought of is, does the teacher eat in the classroom? They might keep a snack there because, they're moving all day, they're up and down. So, they might need that snack to kind of get through. So, make sure it's that the teacher knows that they should not have something that has peanuts again, is probably the most common one, or soy, things like that, so that that's not an inadvertent cross-contamination from the teacher eating that and then touching something else, which then, causes some type of reaction. Now, when I link this article, there is a page that has a link or a grid with a lot of different, information, and it's very broken down. So each section is, what can you do as a parent? What do you do as a educator? What do you do as cafeteria staff? So that you can look through it yourself. And, again, I would say even let the school, the cafeteria know that these types of resources are out there so that they are empowered too. Now, I'm going to end today with some information that, thankfully I never went through it, even though I did have some allergies as a child, but bullying, and maybe I was just lucky. I did go to a very, very small school, and, the teachers then were very aware of everything that was going on, so maybe that helped. But students, or children, I should say, they can sometimes be bullied for things that I wouldn't even imagine. It's basically, some type of behavior towards another, student for basically any type of arbitrary reason. And so I guess if bullying happens for other reasons, it can also happen for those with a food allergy. Now, to me, this would probably come out when children are left out of things. So, if a child, can't have peanuts, yet something's going on, some type of activity where they might come in contact with that and that child's excluded, that gives someone else who has that attitude of, wanting or needing to bully someone, it gives them someone to go to. So as educators, people should be looking out at ways to include each student so there's not, someone who could be pointed to that says that they're different. So make sure that you include, each student. Now, I know this was in college, but at the time, you really couldn't get the flu shot if you were allergic to egg. I have since found that that's not necessarily true, but, at the time, that was the information people were going by. And the school nurse, or the college nurse practitioner, came in to give a talk about how important it was to get the flu shot. That happened in one of our classes. They set some time aside. And she actually stood up there and said, now, it's very important to get the flu vaccine, not just for you, but also some people can't have the flu vaccine because they can't eat eggs. And she looked directly at me and said, can I talk about your situation? I can't really talk about it without your okay because of HIPAA. And I'm like, well, everybody knows now. So I can't remember if she actually said HIPAA or privacy reasons, but yeah, she looked right at me when she said that. And, again, very small school. I was sitting next to my roommate, and she just looked at me and shook her head. Nobody said anything because we're in college, and thankfully, at least, everybody was very adult about it. But, with children, if that had been different, if I had been in 5th grade maybe, and someone came in to discuss things and pointed out I was allergic to eggs, I would have felt like, just curling up. I felt that way as an adult, so as a child, it would have been much more intense. So, really, this is something you want to keep in close contact with the schools, because a lot of times children will not report this. They'll think, well, if I report it and whoever did it gets in trouble, then they're just going to come for me, even more. Now, as I've said a few times, a lot of people are not really aware of how dangerous an allergy can be. That there is kind of this thought it's just the sneezing or runny eyes or itchy eyes. So it's kind of a lack of knowledge that really leads to the bullying, that the other child, the one who is bullying, the one who has the allergy, they're not really aware of how dangerous it can be. So try to keep an open line of communication with your child. If they come home and you can tell something's wrong, kind of ask open-ended questions like, what did you have for lunch today? Who did you sit in with the cafeteria? How did you do with whatever subject? Just try to keep a conversation going and see if at some point they open up and let you know what's going on, because a study showed that less than half of the children who are bullied actually report it to their parents. Now, we have to understand too, for the other child, like I said, it's kind of a lack of awareness. So if there's really a twofold things that need to be done. First, you do want to discuss this with a principal or other administrator at the school. Try to keep track of notes, like I said earlier, that you've had this meeting. Don't have them change anything for your child. If you have certain protocols in place to try to protect them, changing it up would actually look to the child bullying a student as, oh, look, they have to have something special done for them. It will just point them out all over again. Make sure your child still knows that it's important for them to stand up or advocate for themselves, and try to follow up and make sure that, this is just me, but if it's a young child and they don't know what they're doing is harmful, or they aren't aware of how anaphylaxis works, how a severe allergy works, I don't really think there should be a punishment if, say, it's their first time doing it. They need to be made aware. Again, this is my opinion, is if the first time a child does something wrong, that they're not aware that it's wrong and they just automatically get punished, that kind of puts their defenses up and makes them more mad if something similar happens in the future. So try to spread some positive reinforcement with education as compared to punishment. Now, again, this is maybe for the first offense, but if it does keep happening, speaking for myself, if it keeps happening, then I would want to have the sit-down meetings with the administration, the counselors at the school, find out what's being done about it. So we can't take each individual event and kind of say the same thing should be happening with every event. But education is key. If it's a first offense, I really think the education is what they should focus on rather than punishment, so that the child doesn't get even matter about what's going on. Now, just a reminder that allergies is actually considered a disability. So there are protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act. In one of the articles that I've read that I'll link, there is some information regarding that. But what I'm going to do is I will end with this today. I had a feeling that the episode, especially with younger children, would take a little bit longer. When it comes to transitioning to college or being adult, by then we've already lived some of these experiences, so we know. But make sure you start at a young age so that that reinforcement is always there for your child. So next week we'll go over more of the college students and adults, how they need to handle certain situations or should handle certain situations. And then the episode after that will deal more with asthma, as we've touched a couple points on it, but not that many. Now, before I end today, there are just a couple things I want to bring up. I don't usually like to bring this up, but I understand with podcasting this happens. If you do follow me, or if you don't, following me would actually help the podcast as far as boosting it for a number of people to see it. From my understanding, certain podcatchers or places where you would go to listen to the podcast, if there's a review, especially then if there's a 4 or 5 star rating, it kind of makes it more visible to those who are looking for it. So, I kind of want to, spread this message that people have a voice, that, there is still positivity in this world. So, if you do listen to this on a podcatcher that allows for reviews, please make sure that you're, subscribing, following, leaving a review so that it is available to, more people. Now, there's some things that you either want to discuss in future episodes, or things that you even think I need to change with the way I do the episodes now. I'm still kind of learning with all this. I honestly had not even listened to a podcast till a little more than a year ago. I didn't really know what they entailed, and even though I'd seen things about them, I didn't even think of how I would do one until I saw a movie on the Hallmark Channel. It was a mystery where somebody has a podcast. So, I kind of knew they were out there, but I just didn't understand how they worked. I'm still kind of learning how they work. So, if you can subscribe, rate, or share. And also, if you are interested in things like true crime, puzzles, or engineering, natural disasters, I do have another podcast that I put out less frequently. I do that one about every 2 weeks, and it covers true crime, natural disasters, man-made disasters. When I said puzzles, I really look at whenever anything tragic happens, we need to look at everything, put the pieces together to figure out the puzzle, and try to take steps to where it does not happen again. You take every tragedy and try to get something out of it to try to prevent it again in the future. So I've had a couple episodes out there. If you want to take a look at them, I'll link the information to that in the description. It's called Danger on Delmarva. I live on the Delmarva Peninsula. That's Delaware, Maryland, Virginia on the East Coast. And, it's focusing really on those areas, whether the crime occurred there or the disaster occurred there, or if there was some type of influence or contact with any of those states. So, again, I'll link that. I kind of do that one because I do like putting puzzles together and trying to figure out what happened. But sometimes the material can be a little heavy, and, just kind of as a warning for that. All right. Well, I do appreciate everybody taking the time out to listen today. If you do have any thoughts or suggestions, I'll link my information for contact in the description. So the description will have my contact information, sources, change.org petitions for both EpiPen and diabetes, insulin medication. Those are out there, as well as the link to Danger on Delmarva. So I hope everyone has a great week. Stay safe out there. I know it's getting hot too, so make sure that you're trying to stay hydrated, stay cool, and I will talk to everyone next week. Thank you. Bye.